just barely at a screen there, and then the edge of that table is the other one, so you have the whole.
Sorry for abandoning you.
No.
And he was just that's just the nature of this, but I just want to give something for intro. I'm glad. So what an exciting thing that Q wants to.
I think we do.
Jules is out.
She feels good for it. Like she would know, but she's actually really excited about it. She's like, everybody is. She's like, up there right now. We're at least presidential or so we have like people that are trying to do.
And does that mostly go to him and his team?
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I realized I've gotten up to speak a couple times, but I don't know if I've ever actually introduced myself. I'm Lucy. I work at the Freedom Story. I don't super love using a mic to present, but I know that there's people online, so we'll make it work. thanks for coming to our session today about ethical storytelling. This is a topic that's really close to my heart, and we're going to talk about why that is in just a few minutes. But I am just really thankful for you for giving me your time, especially in the afternoon of day 3. Whoa, thanks for not taking a nap instead. That was my temptation, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, just really appreciate you being here. I hope that this feels like a fun and inclusive space. We're just gonna have a discussion, okay? The word ethical, like, I think is a little bit scary, right? Like, you put it up on the screen and it's like, whoa, ethical. I'm not interested in being like the ethical storytelling police, right? Like, I'm not interested in telling you that what you're doing is or isn't ethical. Like, I think that this is a discussion that we're having, and we're going to talk about some leading practices and some things that we do at Freedom Story, some lessons that we've learned. But I'm hoping that this is kind of a bit of a two-way dialogue, and we're going to have some time later in the session to hopefully have some interactive elements. So just want to like lay that on the table. I'm not here to like police you. We're here to have a conversation. Oh man, hold on 1 second. Let's see if we can get the slides to work. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm Lucy. That's me. I work with Freedom Story. Freedom Story is an organization in Chiang Rai with an R. We are currently in Chiang Mai with an M. Chiang Rai is 4 hours north of here. We work on child trafficking prevention in northern Thailand, and I've been working in northern Thailand for the last 10 years. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and just very thankful for that opportunity to talk about something that I love, ethical storytelling. So what is ethical storytelling? Ethical storytelling seeks to be a new standard, although I think now it's maybe not so new, but seeks to be a new standard of storytelling that is built on accuracy, trust, transparency, respect, inclusivity, diversity, empowerment, accountability, all of these really wonderful, very big, kind of like aspirational things that we want to do with our storytelling. What it really is an acknowledgement that nonprofits across the spectrum, not just anti-trafficking nonprofits, but nonprofits, funders across the spectrum of different topics, need to tell stories in order to share the impact of the work that we're doing. We're going to talk today a lot about storytelling for purposes like fundraising, but I want to acknowledge that fundraising is not the only way and the only reason that we tell the stories of the work that we're doing. And the principles or the concepts that we're going to talk about today are applicable not just to anti-trafficking work, but also to anti-trafficking work. And personally, I believe that as a group of people, as a movement, as an industry that's dedicated to fighting exploitation, we cannot be exploiting people's trauma and their stories in the process of our storytelling or our fundraising, right? Because that's kind of just perpetuating that exploitation, but in a different way. So that's what ethical storytelling is. These are some of the values that are going to ground our conversation today. So ethical storytelling, we listen to constituent voices, right? We seek to listen to a diversity of voices. We don't just want one particular angle. We want to learn. Neith earlier talked about, what did he say? A symposium of failures or something, or a festival of failures, okay? I'm about to get into like a big Freedom Story failure in a minute. We are a community, okay? Truly, like, we want to be a community that we're all striving towards like one goal together. We're all on the same team, pulling in one direction. We want to seek to share resources. So I'm going to share some resources later in the presentation, and we're also always evolving. So you're learning and you're doing better, and then you're learning and you're doing better over time. So that's going to be some of the grounding of our conversation today, some of the values of ethical storytelling. So Freedom Story was born off of a documentary that was made in 2007, 2008. A group of Americans came out to Thailand. They wanted to talk about trafficking and exploitation. I was not part of this group, so I get to talk freely about this. They came out to Thailand. They came to the red light district in Bangkok. They kind of thought that's what the angle was going to be. If you like cast your mind back, this was around like the first time that trafficking was really being talked about kind of in a mainstream way in most of North America, at least. And so they came to this red light district. They thought that was going to be the focus of the documentary. They ended up telling a story of this young girl named Kat. This is how old she was when they made the documentary. They came up to Chiang Rai with an R, And they told Kat's story. And it's about a 15-minute, 20-minute documentary, okay? And they talk a lot about Kat and her family and her background. And they go into a lot of really personal detail. They use a lot of terminology that we don't really use anymore. But again, this was like almost 20 years ago. And where am I going with this? Ended up talking about how Kat was very at risk of trafficking. And that's kind of the focus of the documentary. When they came out, they didn't intend to start a nonprofit, but they saw that because Kat was very at risk, education and opportunity were going to provide her alternative paths. And that's how they started Freedom Story. It's a very moving documentary, and they used it to kind of launch the organization. It helped us sponsor our first 20 scholarship students. It's a very moving and kind of engrossing film. And it was, at the time, like printed on DVDs and distributed to people. You can remember what a DVD is. When Kat turned 18, Kat became our first ever scholarship student. When Kat turned 18, they asked if they could put her film online. And she actually said no. And she had been a scholarship student with Freedom Story for over 10 years at that point. And so it was really a very impactful moment for our organization to really engage with why she didn't want that film online. And we're gonna actually allow her to speak for herself here in a moment. She has consented for the film that I'm about to play to be played. But it was just this really beautiful moment of seeking to understand how do we as nonprofits, as practitioners, tell stories in a way that is honoring and dignifying to all parties involved. So I'm hoping that the audio is gonna work here, and I'm gonna let Kat share her view for herself.
What do you think your mom would think of where you are today?
I think she proud with me. My name is Kat. I am a student. I am studying English education in Ratchapat Chiang Rai University.
Your mom wanted you to be a doctor, right? Tell us how you feel about science.
I don't like science anymore. I think I want to be a teacher. I want to make a school, English school, for the student can come and study. I've been with Vatana Seri for 8 years. When I have a scholarship, my mind is changed. I can think in the future, I can think more than that. What I want to be, what I want to do, what I want to study. I can think in that way. But before, no, just can read and can write. I think it's better and help my life a lot. Have me more experience and make me understand many things better.
When you watch the film now, how does it make you feel?
The first thing I miss my mom. It's make me think I am grown up and my life is very different than the film. Right now, my life is getting better, a lot better than in that film. In that film, I think my life is just in the village. But right now, my life is better, not just in the village, but in the city, in the university, in the world.
Yeah.
It's bigger.
For our nonprofits, it's important for organizations to tell the story. But how do you think that organizations can do that in a way that is good for everyone?
If you want to put it in online, I think it's a good way to ask them what do you want, and if they say yes, ask them why. But if they say no, ask them why. That you can understand and we can learn together.
When you turned 18, I asked you if we could put your film online, and you said no. And I'm so proud of you for being honest. So can you tell me why you chose to not have it be put online?
Because, the first thing I think I am a child. I am not grow up enough, and I wanted to think like every life will be like that. It's bad, I think. The film is about my family, my life, and my mom. I don't want them to be sad with me in that thing. I am grown up. I am not be like that. And I want them to remember me in that way all the time because the world will change and I have changed too.
She's so articulate. If you only watch that first film from when she's 7 or 8, you could jump to a lot of conclusions about how her life might have turned out or the path that she might have ended up taking. But her life, like all of our lives over 15, 17 years, has had many different twists and turns. And we've had the opportunity to do follow-up stories on where Kat is now. I had the chance to go to her wedding a few years ago. We've traveled to America together, to Australia. She's studying for her master's in administration. She's a wonderful, wonderful person, but she is so much more than what is shown in that documentary that was made almost 20 years ago. And that's what she's really trying to say there, is that, you know, she's more than just this one particular part of her story. She's more than just this one angle of her story. We're all very complex people, right? And if you were to sit down with me and say, you know, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? I could tell you that. I might not want it to go on the internet, but I am more than the worst thing that's ever happened to me or some difficult things that I've been through. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we tell stories of really difficult, hard things in a way that is honoring and dignifying for everybody involved? So when Kat told us that she didn't want her film online, there she is, this was a few years ago, but when she told us she didn't want her film online, it really launched a conversation within the organization about ethical storytelling. So we took the opportunity to launch ethicalstorytelling.com. You can check it out, there's resources. It's been a little bit on the back burner, but hopefully we're gonna bring it back. We also had the opportunity to rebrand. Okay, we used to be called the Sold Project. Whoa, okay? Now we're called Freedom Story. We had the opportunity to go from something that was maybe a bit more of a negative name to something that's a bit more positive. In Chiang Rai, the kids in the area that we work would call themselves like the equivalent of like the sold kids. Yeah, not great, okay? But now they're Freedom Story kids. So it's a bit of a shift, right? A bit of a shift from maybe away from negative towards something that's a little bit more positive. So I shared that as a way to say that Freedom Stories started doing ethical storytelling out of some of the failures that we had experienced as an organization. We are not perfect, but we tried to take the opportunity to learn from some of the mistakes that we made to be able to move forward. I would love to just take a few minutes. I really want this to be interactive, so I'd love to take a few minutes if anyone is willing to share, like, what are your struggles with ethical storytelling as an organization or as a person? Yeah.
Trying to explain that just because you know someone's a survivor, it doesn't entitle you to what they've survived, like the actual events. So if someone's a rape survivor, you don't need to ask anything further than that. You don't need to know what happened. And sometimes that can be quite, you get a lot of pushback. You know, we want to do a human library. Red flag, do not do a human library.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that kind of, it's okay for you to know that they've survived this thing, but you don't get to know what that was.
For the folks online, she was saying that, you know, just because you know somebody is a survivor of something doesn't give you access to like details about that potentially traumatic experience. Thank you. Yeah.
I think depending on where they're at in their healing journey, for some survivors it is traumatic to tell their story, and it can feel like coercion when the organization that has helped them is the one asking to share their story. They might feel like they can't say no. For some survivors, it may be empowering to be able to use their voice to tell their story and to feel like their story has made an impact for others. So as an organization trying to gauge that and figure out, is there ever a time and a place for showcasing those stories in advocacy and raising awareness? And if there is, how do we determine whether a survivor is doing that because she wants to use her voice and she feels empowered, or he, versus if we as the party with the power ask, even if we say you have the right to say no, that power imbalance makes it complicated. So trying to figure that out is the struggle.
Thank you. Yeah. for folks online, talking about power dynamics and sort of trying to discern when someone might be saying yes to telling their story when because they feel obligated or they've received services, or maybe they would like to tell their story and kind of navigating that kind of dynamic. Maybe one more. Anybody got one more struggle? Yeah, Katie.
I think knowing at what point in the story to tell the story, or like what is the end of the story, or like when we're all in a story, when do you tell the story of each of us or each person, and like what is the scope of the story, what is the timeline, when is the story ready for the story to be made public?
Yeah. For folks online, just talking about timeline. When do you know that a story is ready to be made public? How do you know when you've kind of reached that point where you might be able to share it publicly? Okay, great. Maybe like one more if anybody has a burning thought that they want to add. Okay. Hard to have a burning thought in a freezing room. Okay, so we've talked a lot. Thank you for sharing. These are really important like ethical dilemmas, right, that I think as organizations seeking to do good better, we are all struggling with. And I think it can make storytelling feel like a very intimidating process. So I want to acknowledge that storytelling is not inherently negative. Stories have a lot of power within them. As human beings, we've had oral histories since the beginning of time. If we had the opportunity to get lunch or coffee, I would ask, so tell me your story. How did you get to where you are today? Like, what brings you to Chiang Mai in July? You know, and that would be how we would connect as people. And that's true of the stories of the work and the impact that we're making as well. Stories are incredibly powerful, and they have the power to do many different things. They have the power to connect. They have the power to connect across languages, across cultures. One of my favorite tools for storytelling is to find that kind of universal human connection between groups of people, right? So especially in 2025, so I'm gonna use the word students. These are the students that Freedom Story works with. I'm gonna use that word a lot today. That's just the demographic population that we work with. My students are watching the same TikToks that like kids in the States are probably watching, right? Or like we're making the same jokes. Like we all have these universal human connections across languages and across cultures. We have a lot more in common than we do in different. So bringing power to, or using the power of story to connect people across experiences, across cultures, across languages. Storytelling also has the power to provide understanding. We are working on a super complex issue, right? Have you ever tried to sit down with someone and, I mean, sometimes I'm like at a party and they're like, what do you do for work? And I'm like, sometimes I lie, but when I tell the truth, it's like hard to explain, right? And you're like, it just kind of feels a little clunky. So, but storytelling, I find when you break it down to like individual stories of one person, has that opportunity to provide greater understanding. Even if it's a composite story, even if you've brought together stories of a bunch of different people and told them as a composite story, it still has the opportunity to provide a lot of understanding. Storytelling can also be healing, okay? As part of a trauma healing journey, timing, this is a really difficult question. We'll come to it maybe a little bit later. But as part of the process of healing from trauma, being able to tell your story, being provided the opportunity to tell your story can be a very healing process. Luong the other day in her incredible M&E session, if you didn't watch it, you should go back. If you weren't able to attend, you should go back and watch. Talked about wanting to protect survivors from third-party media, not allowing them to interact directly, and a survivor kind of saying to them, well, I actually really want to tell my story at this time, right? And Freedom Story has had very similar experiences. And so it can be a very healing process, right? There are also really considerable concerns. We're gonna come to those in a moment. But storytelling overall can provide a lot of healing for people because you're able to reclaim your narrative. You're able to say, this is my experience, this is who I am, this is part of who I am, these are the things that I've gone through. Storytelling in the same way also gives power. I think for the longest time, nonprofits across the board, we used storytelling as a way to kind of take power from people and to tell a particular narrative that might have benefited the nonprofit. But I see more and more storytelling as an opportunity to I don't like the word empower, but storytelling is an opportunity to give a platform for people to tell their own story, right? You're just providing an opportunity for people to tell their own story. And so it can give power back to people who have had their power kind of taken from them. So it's not inherently a negative experience or a negative thing that we're doing. So we've established that as a group, okay? There are concerns, right? First and foremost, re-traumatization. I think we don't need to talk about this too long in a group of professionals, but you can experience re-traumatization in the process of telling your story, especially when it's not gone about, in a way that is thoughtful and trauma-informed and considers the needs of someone whose story is being told. It can be a very traumatizing experience. And so there are ways to mitigate that experience, but that is definitely one of the concerns with storytelling. Another concern is a lack of control. So if you sat down with me and I told you about the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and you went and told someone else, and they told somebody else, and they told somebody else, by the time it's been shared like 4 or 5 times, the narrative, have you ever played telephone? Yeah, by the time it gets to the end of the room, like we could do it now, but we don't have time. It's a different story, right? So if you tell your story to someone, you do lose an aspect of control over that narrative. We've all, I'm sure, had experiences where you share something online and somebody else reshares it with their comments, and then they kind of get conflated, and eventually you sort of lose the clarity of what was shared in the first place. So that's just another aspect of a concern, is that you do sort of have a lack of control in the storytelling process. This is particularly true in videos and on social media. I'm sure many of us almost like hope that some of our storytelling might go viral, right? You sort of like put something out in the world and you think, oh, I hope a lot of people see it. But there's also, there's like negative consequences to that as well. And so when you're talking about storytelling in video, and especially on social, especially personal stories, you have to be really considerate and thoughtful about the details that you're including, the imagery that you're using, and kind of how you're talking about your storytelling. I think, again, in 2025, this is also really true because a lot of our students, a lot of our participants follow Freedom Story on social media. So they see the way that we talk about them. Like they see the way that we're telling their stories, they're interacting with them, and so it's really important to just be honoring in that process. So I think for a lot of nonprofits, it's really easy to fall into this kind of simple narrative, right? Where I'll use myself as an example. So, Lucy's a young girl growing up in Thailand, let's say, and she comes from this and that background, and she has this and that kind of struggles, and so, you've got the beginning, and then you've got the conflict. Okay, let's say like Lucy's like gonna drop out of school, and she's very at risk of trafficking. And then like, okay, Freedom Story comes in and sort of like saves the day, like gives me a scholarship, fixes all my problems. And then that's it, right? That's the end of the story. And it's like, now Lucy's like all better. I think that that's like a very easy narrative for us to tell as nonprofits. And that's, I think, one that feels very appealing for like particular audiences. But I think as practitioners in the space, we can all acknowledge that that kind of like linear 1, 2, 3, 4, like up and to the right type narrative is very rarely the case with the folks that we're walking alongside, right? Often there's progress, and then there's challenges, and then there's more progress, and then there's more challenges, and it's very much like a almost cyclical as opposed to being kind of a linear narrative. The difficulty becomes, how do you explain a cyclical narrative in a way that is easy to understand for folks that are not engaging in this work every day, right? I talk about like our audience for our storytelling. If they think about Freedom Story like twice a year, that would be a lot. I think about Freedom Story like 365 days a year, okay? So how do you boil down and try to simplify your storytelling in a way that makes it accessible for people that are not engaging in your work every single day? But I do think that these are the types of narratives that we need to be like aware of, and we need to try to engage with greater complexity than just this type of narrative. Okay, storytelling has many different impacts, okay? We've talked about some ethical concerns, and we've talked about some of the positives of storytelling. Storytelling has a really strong impact on the storyteller, and by that I mean the person whose story is being told. right? We've talked about issues of re-traumatization. We've also talked about how storytelling can give power back to people, but it does have an impact on that storyteller. Beyond telling their story, we all have, I'm sure we're all aware, but you have to be concerned or like considerate about stigma, right, in the community where the person is living, how they might be viewed, even amongst other participants in your program. If you're especially like kind of choosing to highlight one particular person's story, how are the other people in your program going to view that person? Are they going to think that they got special treatment or different services? So it does have an impact on that individual person, even when you're trying to mitigate that through the process of ethical storytelling. And what we're going to get to today is the idea that ethical storytelling is a process. As much as it's about the final product, it's actually about investing in the process of your storytelling. So it's worth acknowledging that it does impact the storyteller. It also impacts the audience. I hear from a lot of people a lot of the time, like our donors want this, our donors want that. People need a particular type of narrative or they want a particular type of narrative. I totally sympathize. I do totally sympathize with that feeling. I also think people get used to what you give them. So if you feel that you have to give like a very sensationalized narrative, and that's what you're giving to your audience, then they will get used to that. Most people that I talk to about anti-trafficking, they learn about trafficking as an issue from nonprofit media, and maybe from like the news a little bit every once in a while. But for the most part, the way that they're learning about trafficking and the issue is actually from us. So I do think it's a really important point to make out that if we are feeding only one particular type of narrative to people, that's the narrative that they're going to get used to. And so it's important to tell a diversity of stories, things that involve, maybe different types of trafficking casework or trafficking cases or cases in your programs that have different types of outcomes, right? If you're telling like one particular story all the time, of course the people who are consuming your media are going to think that that's the majority of your stories. That's the only thing that they have access to. So it is a two-way conversation, but it is a two-way conversation. Like we are able to choose what we put out as much as we can kind of consider what people might be looking for in the media that they're consuming. So it does have an impact on the audience. It also has an impact on the community, right? So again, like I was saying, I think, back when Freedom Story started or back, when kind of the nonprofit industry was getting started in like the 50s and 60s, there was a larger gap between your audience and your community. Has anybody ever seen the picture of Bono with the kids in Africa? Yeah, that was like back in the 80s. Okay, so at that particular time, like maybe those kids are never gonna see that picture, but in 2025, the likelihood is that they would, right? Because we live in this global digital world where people are interacting online across cultures all the time. And so the way that you are representing the community, if we as Freedom Story were to say, the community is this, the community is that, they're in this particular way or that particular way, it impacts the way that they're viewed and it impacts the way that they might view themselves, right? And they're gonna know that that's how you're talking about them in their media. So storytelling also impacts the community that you're seeking to serve and can kind of undermine that very precious trust that we've all been talking about over the last couple of days. Okay, so now the most important part. We're gonna talk a little bit about some like very practical tools and tips. And again, this is not the end all be all. I'm happy to point to like better and like greater resources, but these are just some of the practices that we have integrated at Freedom Story or that we have found from friends and other practitioners in the space to be helpful. So the first one is to kind of try and co-create stories. So, woo, sounds great. What does that actually mean? Trying to really create a story with somebody, not just for somebody, right? How does this person want their story to be told? Do they want their story to be told? In what way? On what platform? Including, everything from, visuals or video or using a real name or using a pseudonym, showing their face, not showing their face. That's all part of that process. But the point is, it's really about co-creating a story together with the person whose story is being told. That might be a student or a family or a survivor. And it also means, I think, being really thoughtful with your team and taking the time to consider what a storytelling process that was co-created might look like. And that can be like resource intensive in the sense of, I mean, it can be as resource intensive as you want. You can get a fancy camera, you can get a fancy microphone, whatever, or you can just do it on your phone, right? I don't think it has to be resource intensive, but I think the most resources it will take is probably your time and your brain power, which are probably the most precious resources that you have. So just really thoughtfully consider, how can we make this process from beginning to end a really safe, inclusive, hopefully fun process that gives power to somebody to tell their story of what they've experienced in the way that they want it to be told. And so that might mean thinking about things like a timeline. How much time do we need in order to gather and create this story? Who needs to be involved? What are the safeguards that we need to put in place? Do we need to bring in, okay, we've got a caseworker and we've got other folks on the team, but who else do we need to involve in this process, right? In order to make this a co-creation process. So this is kind of what I was talking about, but dedicate resources to the process. Time, energy, your brain power. Really think about what will it take to make this process really thoughtful and be really considerate in the process. Ensure deep consent. Okay, so when we talk about consent, so there's sort of, asking someone to share their story. We've touched on this already with some of our struggles that we shared, right? Asking, hey, would you feel comfortable sharing your story? That's good, but you really, I think, need to be kind of considering other things that somebody needs to know when they're making that decision as well. So deep consent really means informing someone, like how is the story going to be shared, with who, in what way, on what platforms, for what period of time, right? There's gonna be a slide here in a second where we'll get into the details of all of these. But if you sat down with me to interview me about a really difficult time in my life, and you said, this is gonna go on our social media, and we have like 500 followers, I might share different things than if you said this is going on my social media and we have 500,000 followers, right? And so with our students, we'll sit down and we'll like pull up the Instagram feed, or I'll say, we have X number of people on our email list, right? These are just a starting point. Obviously, people can forward emails on, or stuff can go viral, but just giving people like a context to understand what it is that they're consenting to, rather than just saying, would you tell your story, right? Trying to give them as much information to make a really informed decision as possible. This is from our friends at Collective Threads. They have a really great ethical storytelling tool. I'll put it in the Whova later. So informed consent, freely given, right? This is a tough one. We talked about this earlier. How do you know that consent is freely given? But no one should ever feel coerced into giving their consent to tell their story. Reversible, I think this is really important. Making sure somebody knows at any point in the storytelling process that they can reverse their consent. They could do it on the day that you're interviewing. They could do it on the day that they're publishing. Obviously, once something goes up on the internet, you can take it down, right? People might have screenshots, so you can't guarantee that nobody will see it. But it is still able to be taken down, and making sure people know that their consent can be reversible. Informed, so making sure that everyone is able to understand what their responsibilities are. This means making sure that this conversation happens in their native language with people that they feel really comfortable with. If I sit down with one of our students and I have this conversation, it's a different power dynamic than if one of my local staff does it. And making sure that that process happens well before the story gathering process actually begins, right? Because if I sit down with you and like try to do this and then jump straight into interviewing you, that's gonna be a different feel than if I asked you ahead of time, hey, would you consider telling your story? Here's what that looks like. I'm gonna check back in a couple weeks to see what you're thinking. Enthusiastic, this should be something that they're really excited about. That doesn't mean that people don't get nervous. I'm nervous in this exact moment, okay? But it means that you're enthusiastically willing to do this. And then specific, kind of what we talked about. What specifically are they consenting to? Videos, photos, pseudonyms, showing their face, on what platforms, how many people, for what period of time. We also have, often we have partners who ask for stories for their own fundraising, right? So making sure that people know this is a story that might be passed on to a fundraising partner in Australia, and they're going to use it for their fundraising. Again, just helping people understand the scope of what it is that they're consenting to. Okay, embracing complexity. Okay, I think that often, again, like I said, we work in this really complex issue, and I think often the temptation can be to boil down things or kind of simplify things in order to not lose people in the storytelling process. In 2025, I think we all have like the attention span of like 1.5 seconds or something. It's like rapidly decreasing because of TikTok. But I still think it's worth embracing complexity in the storytelling that we're doing as organizations and as people. And what that really looks like, I think, is trusting that the right people are going to read or watch your entire video, right? Or they're going to read the entire article. Not everybody's going to, but that's okay. Not everyone is your people. You just have to focus on the people that are going to walk through that complexity with you. This is something that we have really leaned into as an organization, just trusting that if we share the complexity of what we're working on, that some people will meet us in it. Not everybody does, but some people do. And that helps us feel really known and seen as an organization. And so I think it's worth, not stepping back from that complexity. It also takes time to create the media, time to gather the stories, time to prep somebody for telling their story, right? So if we know that we need a story by whatever timeline, working backwards from there so it doesn't feel like a rushed process or a hurried process or something that's going to put a lot of pressure on either your teammates or the person whose story is being told. So really ensuring, and sometimes that means like literally dedicating an entire day just to the storytelling gathering process, right? And so allowing that time is really important. This is something that's relevant in English. It's not as, I don't know if it's relevant in other languages, it's not as relevant in Thai, but really using people first language. So trying to think of an example. A student who is at risk rather than like an at-risk student. When you put the qualifier first, it kind of becomes part of somebody's identity in English. And their identity is primarily as a person who is a survivor of trafficking, right? A student that is at risk, a person with disabilities, as opposed to a disabled person. And it really just allows for them to be a person first, rather than this thing that they have experienced. Embracing authenticity, right? So really trying to show people as authentic people, and what that really means is showing things that are positive, and for us as an organization, sharing the things that we've learned, the mistakes that we've made. Are we gonna post like every failure that we've ever had like all over our website? No, but I share those in conversations with trusted individuals, right? And maybe with donors, and I say, hey, we actually tried this program and it really just doesn't work, so we're gonna pivot in this other way. It also means that, with the people whose stories that you're telling, the individual people, showing them as authentic, holistic individual people. Talk about, their family, the things that they like to do on the weekend, not just the trauma that they've experienced, right? And we'll get into some of those things that you all mentioned earlier, like how much detail do people really need, but really just showing them as authentic individuals as well. Empowering diverse voices. So this is something else that we've tried in the last couple of years at Freedom Story. It used to be that we would tell most of our stories kind of in the organizational voice. So we would do an interview, and then we would kind of tell the story with quotes from the students. Something that we've done in the last couple of years is actually just said to students, like, would you like to write your own story? And they'll submit their own stories in the way that they want them to be written. We do, we edit them, or we might add context for different audiences who might not fully understand. But it is literally just giving them a platform to share their experiences and share, what part of their story it is that they want to share. And it's always really interesting to see the things that they focus on that maybe we wouldn't have known about or we wouldn't have thought to ask about. And so there's just a really interesting opportunity. You can also do this with staff members or board members. People want to hear from a diversity of folks in your organization. If you're a coalition, it could be coalition members. just trying to think of, how do we tell diverse, complex stories without relying on kind of a singular narrative of a survivor or a participant or something like that. Transparency, yeah. So this just kind of goes back to what I was saying. Just trying to be transparent both in the process with the storyteller and in the way that you're telling the story. We always, when we do interviews, there's caseworkers present, there's multiple people, it's happening in a safe space, right? So often when we go to a village, it's like, ooh, who's that? And everyone's like coming in to say hi, and so you gotta kind of like wait for that to quiet down so you can have these like conversations in a slightly more private space. But just being really transparent about what your lessons learned are, the things that you are doing well, the things that are not going so well, how trafficking is changing in your region. I find that people just respond really well to that transparency and that authenticity, and that can really be something that makes you very unique as an organization and really represent your participants and your constituents well. This is also an opportunity to educate on the issue. Like I said, most people are learning about trafficking from nonprofit media. So this is your chance to really share that complexity, to educate on the issue, to talk about how trafficking is changing and these new forms of trafficking that we're seeing, or new forms of exploitation, or how vulnerability is changing. It's really like a great opportunity to, bring people along on the journey with you. It's also a good opportunity to share your impact. We're talking primarily about storytelling on an individual level, but having statistics is also really important. Statistics convince, right? And stories tend to move people. So if you have some sort of monitoring evaluation statistics, or even just statistics from research, including those in your story can be a really powerful way to expand or kind of strengthen your storytelling. Okay, so we're gonna have a little bit of a workshop. We have like 15 more minutes. I can also answer questions, but I thought this might be more interesting. We have 30 more minutes, even better. We'll have time to do both. Okay, I'm gonna pass these out. I would love for you to get in small groups. This is supposed to be like a fun, interactive session. There are some scenarios. There's no right or wrong answers, right? We're trying to like figure this out together as a collective. There are different scenarios. And what I would love for you to discuss in your small groups is, if you had this come up at your organization, what would you do? Who do you think needs to be consulted in the storytelling process? And what values or risks are involved in this particular scenario? And then we'll come back together as a group. Okay, that's page 1. We'll come to page 2 later, so just focus on page 1 for now, okay? Any questions? If you don't want to do this, you can leave, it's okay, I understand. Not everybody wants to like interact with each other. Okay, we're gonna give it a go. If it doesn't work, I tried my best.
Can you take one and pass it? Yeah. I'm gonna take a picture of it online. Oh yeah, thank you. I'll post the link online.
Do we have one each or one for
It should be about one each. We got like 50 sets printed, so it should be about one each. And for those of you that are online, I'm gonna put the link online. I didn't fully think about how this would work with an online audience. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Kim.
I'm gonna give you about 10 minutes and then we'll check back in.
Do you want us to choose a scenario?
You can choose one scenario, you can start from the top, whatever feels best for your group. Sometimes I feel like people like whip through, sometimes it's like, takes more time.
Is there a particular one that you want to do stuff at, or?
So we're trying to ask for a detailed
Try hard.
I guess the first question is just so the program what is their activity? And they may be stable, but if there's like still the area of maybe they might find are they still I guess
Two more minutes. 2 more minutes. Last 1 minute before we come back together. Okay. All right. I'd love to come back together. Okay. Thank you so much. Trying to keep an eye on our chat, but our friends online. Okay. Would anybody like to share? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Would anybody like to share some of what they talked about? Or some of the key takeaways, any reflections from your group? Is there anybody that would like to share? Again, safe space, not the ethical storytelling police, would anybody like to share some of what they've some of what they talked about, some of what they struggled through in their group? And a lot of these, I think it's not necessarily a right and a wrong answer. One of the things that we found really, really helpful at Freedom Story is to create frameworks, decision-making frameworks or decision-making processes for our ethical storytelling process. And so I really encourage you, this takes time and kind of effort with the 1 million other things that you have to do, okay? But I really encourage you to sit down with members of your team that are dedicated to this and try to come up with a framework or a process for ethical storytelling for your organization. But would anybody like to talk about reflections from your group? Yes, please. I'm going to send the mic around.
Thank you. We reordered your first questions because you can't work out what you'll do until you've answered the other two. Totally. So we completely left that one off, did the other two, and then came back with more information. We went through all the scenarios. We probably had the most to say about the first one, about, can you make a decision at 15 years old that might impact you 10 years down the line when you're at a different place in your life, depending on, the child protection laws, whose permission do you need to get? Can a child make an informed consent even if her parents agree? Is there a way of doing it with a cartoon or an avatar or a bande dessinée? I don't remember the English word, like a drawn story. It's in that way. But without answering those next two, we couldn't answer the first question.
Yeah, I love that. Creative solutions for a way to potentially still tell the story, but in a way that perhaps is a bit more, hides an identity or is perhaps a bit more protective. Any other thoughts on the exercise, reflections from your group?
We stuck with question 3 and we went back and forth a bit about it. With regards to the stability, it was saying that the program staff says the survivor's stable. And so when we looked at that, we consider the stability maybe more to do with mental or physical. We also wanted to consider that if the male or female is stable but has vulnerable housing situation, they may feel pressured into giving their story because they may feel the burden and responsibility where the donations are concerned. And then of course it's saying that the funder asks for a detailed survivor story, but how detailed is that story going to be? We have to consider about the nature of the information that's given. And then the fact is we don't want the survivor to be re-traumatized or to struggle because of what is shared, because we know that once something is out there and it's disseminated, it can't be sort of brought back. But our main focus was on considering how that child, that young person is feeling about the entire situation and whether they are burdened into disclosing and to sharing because they feel that by doing so it's going to guarantee that their housing situation is changed. So that was our sort of thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, right? I think there's always a power dynamic. No matter how much you try to equalize that balance, there is a power dynamic between someone that's received services and an organization or a group of people that's providing services, right? So it's really important to make sure that when you're doing the ethical storytelling kind of setup, that people know that part of telling their story doesn't guarantee special protections or special services or anything addition to what they've already received, right? So that's definitely true. And then you mentioned something we talked about earlier too, how much detail do people really need, right? When we're talking about a trafficking story. I tend to fall on the side of thinking not that much, right? I think most of us that are kind of working with folks that have lived experience and different experiences of trauma know that those stories are compelling in and of themselves. They don't need embellishment, they don't need additional detail. And they also, those people deserve to not have all of this information out in the public domain. So absolutely right. Yeah, go ahead.
For most of these, we pretty much just said no. But in wanting to say no to all of them, we also found that a lot of these were ways that we can educate the people that we're working with. We can educate the parents. What does it look like? What does shame look like? What is, you know, and again, like I love what you said about making it potentially an animation or something a little bit different. The guy, the billboard, what the heck? No, but again, like again, that's another way of educating someone and letting them know what is and isn't ethical. The journalist, no faces will be shown. Again, letting them know. I mean, there are other identifying features that could potentially be in the photo. And like Sophie was saying here, like their organization is just no kids in photos, period. It's just a blanket no. It doesn't matter if their faces are showing or not. And so, but again, it's a way of, and it's a point of educating and saying why this is so important and why their safety and identity is so important.
I think just as that, like that online component goes into just like cyber safety as well. And then just like photos, yes, like identifying, but then also like people are so weird and smart and can find a location based on a photo. And so if you're protecting kids and then being like, also, here you go, this is where they are, like kind of just understanding that and then trying to educate, like we also are not perfect at all, but just trying to educate even our local staff too about how to be safe with that as well. So it's like storytelling, but then also helping just know about cyber safety and how blurry those lines are. And even if it's well-informed and well-intended, like just creepy people do creepy stuff. And so just rather be careful to not even give them that avenue.
Totally. One of the things that we're talking about right now as an organization is like, even when you try to be really careful with AI now, right? And you can like take somebody's image and put them like in a deep fake, and what does that mean? And are we better to use AI to create images of children that don't exist? I don't know. It's just a really complicated like moment in time, particularly with the growth and the acceleration of technology. Yeah. Any other thoughts? So we're doing this because we're a community, right? Like I don't have all the answers, but I think collectively we're all striving towards something together. So yeah, please.
We had a really good discussion and wonderful points came out, but I just wanted to echo your point on AI because I was reading a risk analysis by the one of the governments, and that came up as a big one where, as you say, the child images can be used by AI, and once they're out there, the AI can do different things. So it's just something we really, really need to start thinking about. And then, Turma mentioned a really good way, I think, if we are struggling with a conversation with the donor who is asking. We also did scenario 3, a lot of detail. She actually said, just point them to the safeguarding policy. And I was like, oh, that's great. Okay, here you are. We don't have to, you know, this is what we do. This is what we don't do.
Right. Sorry, Tirma, do you want to add that?
Yeah, I love a good policy because for that reason, you don't have to make like a case-by-case decision. You also don't have to justify your decision. You just say like, these are the standards for us, and if that doesn't work for you, then that's okay. But this is, you know, back to education, right? We're fighting exploitation, and so this is what that looks like in this particular domain of our work. And I find that people are generally really open to that. Sometimes it takes reiterating that a couple times, but generally speaking, people are pretty open. Any other thoughts? We have some more time.
Just like another coin behind this whole aspect of storytelling is that there's a lot of studies that shows that, you know, you don't actually heal your trauma until you start to tell your story and you're being heard and you're being seen. So I think just for the survivors, especially the minors, to have safe spaces where they can actually practice telling their story, you know, for their own benefit. So it's not like this is going to be used for donors, this is going to be used for re-exploiting you with that kind of thing. But I do believe that we do have to encourage storytelling for that benefit of brain healing. Yeah.
Yes, I think absolutely training your participants on how to tell their story or what storytelling really looks like. We're all storytellers in this day and age, right? We all have a platform on different If you're on social media, you have platforms by which you can tell your own story. And so training people or giving people the opportunity to tell their story for themselves, right? Like you said, I love that point. I think that's really, really relevant. We have about 10 more minutes. Does anybody else have thoughts they want to share? Or we can answer questions. I think at the moment, are there questions in the app? Okay, you can submit questions in the Whova app if you have them, just to give our online friends some chances to participate as well. But if anybody else would like to add anything, I'm happy to walk the mic around. Is that a hand? Yes.
I can speak very loud.
Oh, it's okay. I think the online people can't hear it, even if you speak loud.
So I have heard, other organizations trained on ethical storytelling, and some of what I've heard and how they store the stories are either encrypted or recorded or anything like that. I just wanted to see if our group has learned of any other ways in storing people's stories.
That's a great question. Storing people's stories. Does anybody have thoughts on safe, maybe especially digital ways to store stories?
We've had a few hiccups where we will use a pseudonym for someone, and then, so we've had a few hiccups where we've used a pseudonym the whole way through. And then 2 years later, we've gone, okay, we know that Maria is a pseudonym, but who actually was it? And having that somewhere as well, so that you can go back and go, I can't remember who that actually was. Yeah.
I have also had that. I was like, I'll definitely remember. And then, yeah, it's just hard with time. Any other thoughts? We use, it's not a perfect system, we use box.com, just like an online file saving platform. Yeah, password protected. Selena, do you have any questions? No? Wow, okay. Any other thoughts? Or does anybody want to ask a question like live and in person?
Just because there's time. We're in the middle of creating something for World Day Against Trafficking in persons, where we've just done a series of workshops on human trafficking, how that shows in smaller ways within the migrant domestic worker journey. And then on the third month, we did a photography workshop where we taught them how to take photos on their mobile phones, and then we sent them out to capture their moments of the small moments of trafficking, and then that's going to be our post for World Day Against Human Trafficking. So it's a nice way of getting them to capture what trafficking looks like to them, rather than us defining it.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's so creative.
So yeah, you can find it on the World Day Against Trafficking, so find us. Yeah.
I love that. That's a great idea. Okay, 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. Any other questions? Any questions in the app? No. It's a difficult, complicated process, right? Trying to communicate impact, trying to tell story in a way that invites people in, that brings education, that shares authenticity and complexity and educates on this really difficult topic that has so many different bits and pieces within it. Very rarely are there straightforward answers to some of the problems that we've discussed today. But my key kind of recommendation, if you will, is to have these discussions within your team. And it does take really intentional carving out the time to have those discussions, and also creating a space within your team, right, for disagreement, because sometimes within our team we disagree, and trying to strive towards what the best option is, right? And so I would really encourage you to think about frameworks or policies. If you would like to take a look at ours, I'm happy to share them. Ethicalstorytelling.com has resources online. And Collective Threads was where I had that, the Fry's informed consent from. They have a really wonderful ethical storytelling document as well that they've created. Yeah, look, it's just part of a discussion. Get together with people from other organizations. Sometimes if we're doing kind of a gut check on something, that's what I'll do, is I'll send it to somebody else. And I'll be like, what do you think? We're struggling with this aspect or that aspect. What do you think? Because I think it's about creating opportunities for us to do good better, not just, you know, trying to do our best. We're all striving towards continued learning, continued improvement. So thank you for taking the time. Thanks for like trialing out this like interactive thing with me. I didn't want you to have to like listen to me talk for that long. I'm really thankful. I'm here to chat if you want to chat over the next few minutes. I think we have to go back upstairs. Yeah, you can keep those. On the back is like a very, very brief checklist, okay? Things that you can like think about or go through, questions to ask yourself and your team. You're very welcome to keep those. Are we going back? We have a coffee break. So I'm here if you want to chat. Oh yeah, please. Yeah, please. The link is in the Huba. So it's also accessible online. So yeah, I'm here to chat if you want to chat, but thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
You guys check out the announcement too. You get to
Please check the announcement.
I'm here.
Alana, sorry.
You're the lucky group since I happen to be in this room. We have a survey online. Make sure you do the in-person survey. For the first 100 people that do it and turn it in, you can show I turn this into the coffee people upstairs and they'll give you free cold brew or stuff. Yeah, there's free coffee up there. So you have to show I did the survey, but like, don't just rush through it. Like, actually give us good feedback, please. Because this conference is created through your feedback. We take it very seriously. We spend about 2 months analyzing it, and we use what you tell us this year to create the conference next year. So it should be in your announcement page. Make sure you do the in-person, not the online links. They're a little bit different. Thank y'all.
Yeah, if you have feedback, we want your feedback.
Do you want both done? Like, or is it online for online?
Yeah. Exactly. The online one is for the online people.
For in-person participants.
Yep.
Lucy. Okay. Yes. Oh my gosh. She's so sweet.
How are you?
Oh my gosh. Anyway.
So you're also connected
But I just feel like this change right here.
Okay, then it's like it's lost in the
But definitely there is a transformation.
Yes, of course.
Many times I wouldn't be able to understand everything, but I'm here, but I've got these projects and resources that I can use.
That's a great idea for us to develop. Because I feel like if you take the chance to explain to them, right, like you're getting all this information on this, I mean, it's right that here's what I need, biggest point to rest. I think some of this is cultural. With our ties here, we usually have the same problem. When I go to your sport, I say, no more this, this, and it's always so long, right? And I'm like, I love attention to detail, but I can't always do all of this. It's like, and so I think it's, if you're being, I wonder